Hello, everybody. My name is Pete Bowers of WordWorks, and I'm here in sunny California. I've just begun a new position here at the Nueva School near San Francisco, and I'm working with preschool to high school teachers and students. It's been a real treat. And last week, I went into the writing class, a grade 11 writing class of Jennifer White's, and there was a really rich investigation of what they were doing that I think was informed by the structured word inquiry that we did. And it seems to me that this is a useful way to illustrate the way that this whole idea of structured word inquiry is not as a separate thing that we add to our curriculum, but actually a means of deepening understanding of whatever concepts and terms and ideas that we're working on. So I'm going to jump right in, and I'll share my screen so we can kind of revisit the trail of the investigation that happened. You'll get a sense of why I chose that title in a moment. So what Jennifer had the kids do for the session that I came into was they studied the recent eulogy that President Obama gave for Reverend Pinckney on the occasion of this horrible event not too long ago. And, as Jennifer shared with the students, whatever one's politics or view of President Obama, this particular eulogy has really already been widely described as a historically important presidential speech, which is obviously a very appropriate one for a writing class to interrogate, to study the use of rhetoric and the choices that they make. And they really looked at it with a critical eye as to where was it effective, where was it less effective, and such. One of the frames that I really thought was a rich one that Jennifer wanted to focus on was to ask why, given the circumstances of this story, why do we think that Obama and his speechwriter or speechwriters decided to focus on grace, not justice? Because given the circumstances, one might expect justice to be the logical theme. I'm hoping, I think, that the investigation we did of grace kind of helps illuminate some of those ideas. When I came to the class, Jennifer had identified some words that she thought might be rich for me to investigate. I added a couple of others that I gleaned from the text. The kids began the class by just brainstorming some themes that they thought were important, some rhetorical devices and such. But when I want to dive into a word in something like this, I really want to make sure that we place it inside a context. So, although one of the students I think calculated that the word grace may have been used something like 43 times in the speech, I picked this particular use of it in these two sentences, and I think if you take a look, you'll see in a little bit why I chose this particular frame. Now, I'll give you a heads up that after we look at this word grace in this video, I'm going to take a look at this sentence as well, and a word in here that I think is particularly rich. And in this case, actually, looking at the history and related words is actually even more revelatory in terms of understanding the statement. But we're going to start with the main theme that we're looking at and take a look. So this is a chart that I use to help remind myself and for teachers and kids to remind themselves about questions to ask whenever you're interested in a word. The basic points, I've reframed it recently, but basically it's still the same ideas all the time. What does the word mean is always where to start. Talking about how is it built, morphological kind of connections or structure, and then related words, morphological and etymological, and then the phonology piece. Now, in the case of grace, we started as this little chart is supposed to remind me to remember. We just asked the kids, well, what do you come to this word grace with already before you even saw the speech? And the idea of elegance came up, people being graceful and such. People kind of raise their eyebrows when people realize that, well, people say grace at dinner, And so the idea of thanks was a nice connection to see. And there's even a couple other flavors and words that came up in one of the classes in particular that we'll hit when we dive in a bit deeper. So that's what we started with, this general sense of grace. And then if we look at how was it built, well, we don't see any affixes, so we have to have a base. And then we could look at some morphological relatives. Graceful, disgrace, graceless were all words that came up in the conversation. I can't remember if this one did, but I couldn't resist adding gracious, which actually shares that GRACE base. But in terms of deepening the understanding and discussion, it was really the etymological connections that provided the most revelations, as I guess we'll say. So I'll pop over to what we did. We went to Etymon Now, just briefly, this is an amazing resource, a reference by a man named Douglas Harper, and he's just an amazing scholar, and this is just something that I highly recommend. I even wanted to highlight on this first video, this intro he has here, that Etymon is a map of the wheel ruts of modern English. Etymologies are not definitions. They're explanations of what our words meant, what they meant, and how they sounded over 600 or 2,000 years ago. In particular, I love this wheel ruts of modern English, this idea of we can follow the trail of words as they evolve through our culture and just gain so much from it. So we went ahead and just typed the word grace in here to see what popped up. And, just to get used to how this works, this V, of course, means the verb. So the first attested version of this word in English that Douglas could confirm was circa 1200s, and this idea to thank. So that idea that saying grace is what the kids had mentioned. This mercy, favor, virtue, show favor. But notice he's pointing us to grace, the noun. And so here we can find more of the history of this particular word. And in here we find this Latin gratia, favor, esteem, and gratis, pleasing, agreeable. I won't go into it now, but we talked about this PIE, Proto-Indo-European root, that we're not going to go into right now, but we stop here at this, the furthest root we have evidence of. And as a grade 7 student working with Anne Whiting, Kuala Lumpur, taught me years ago, why not just paste roots in Etymon? It's a search engine, and now what we can do is find words from the same etymological family as grace. And this was actually what was quite interesting. This gratuitous, that's interesting, freely bestowed, done away without pay, spontaneous, voluntary. Okay. This gratulation was a surprise to me. I know congratulations, a spelling that used to drive me crazy, and now makes some sense. But here we see that word gratitude. So that's great. And I did want to get back to grateful, another spelling that people get confused with sometimes. But I want to get back to grace here and see, this is one of the points that really came up in the class, this idea that grace includes this sense of unmerited favor, that this unconditional kind of love and stuff. So anyways, that was our brief intro to making use of it. And then when we come back to what we were studying, the central question, why choose grace, not justice, for this speech? And that investigation we did, I think, gave us a bit more flavor of the underlying this idea of unmerited thanks and trying to become worthy of God's grace and such, as described in the talk. Came up with these words. One of the things that people were arguing was that perhaps this choice of grace was chosen as a way to promote unity and community in a way that might not have been accomplished if they had chosen justice as the main theme. Whereas, so justice, it was discussed, that has this punitive element, and that if he had chosen justice as the main theme, maybe he wouldn't have been as effective at trying to bring unity to the country in this moment of crisis, which the class basically discusses probably one of the main goals that he had. So there's a brief intro to the idea of grace and how you can investigate it. But it was actually, as I mentioned before, this statement where the etymology was particularly powerful for deepening our discussion and understanding. So I'll let you read that to yourself. And the word that I wanted to investigate was this subjugation. And we could look at the morphology and such. The SUB prefix is there. We see an ION. You could wonder about that, but we're just going to, for the moment, I'm going to jump right to the etymology. So we'll go here and we'll type in subjugation. And when we go there, we'll take a look here. When I showed this with the kids, it was quite interesting. As soon as they saw this idea of bring under the yoke, and from this idea of jugular being related, as soon as the word jugular popped up, the class just went, whoa, because this idea of bring under the yoke and jugular is just totally made this statement have so much more power. And so that we commented, we have no idea, no way of knowing whether the authors were purposefully invoking this idea of yoke and jugular, but they didn't have to. It intended for those connotations to be somewhere in connections in the minds of English speakers. But what the point I wanted to make, and that I made with the kids, is that now that we know this, now that we've done this little investigation and find out there really is a connection between yoke and the jugular, now those kids have a means of controlling that, taking control of that. So if they want to write something with the idea of subjugation, well, they can capitalize on this new knowledge and plant the word jugular, plant the word yoke in their writing near this to really hit home and highlight the power that is in the wheel ruts of this word. So with that, I'll end this first little video there. I hope that is a bit helpful, and we'll be sharing some other stories from all sorts of grades to see how we can make use of the understanding of the words, their histories and structures as a way to deepen our understanding in any subject. Cheers.